You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Thursday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to my show. It's the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. And at the same time, you can come over to my YouTube channel, watch the video simulcast of this show, join the live chat room filled with Intrepids, and talk about this show tonight and other things that might come to your mind. That chat room is a free-thinking, sentient beast all its own, and that's over my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. At the same time as all of this is going on during this introduction, go check out my website, ScottAlanRoberts.com. Alan is spelled A-L-A-N. I always have to spell that out because there's 50 million ways to spell Alan. There, it's just going by on the scroll bar down below if you're watching in the visual. ScottAlanRoberts.com. You can see all the stuff I do, what I'm all about, what I do for a living. This show is not necessarily what I do for a living. This show is what I do because I love doing it. Now, if I could do only this show and make everything else be my hobby or the fun stuff I do on the side, I'd do that. But I still have to work for a living while I'm doing this show. So go on over, check out what I do. I'm an illustrator. I'm a designer. I design book covers. I illustrate books. I illustrate kids' books. I do serious illustration, too. If you will, when you think kids' illustrations to adult illustrations, adult not being the X-rated kind, adult meaning, for adult books. And I just put up some pictures, if you're on my Facebook, the other day of a bunch of illustration I did of ancient cylinder seals for a book for my friend R.J. von Bruning. And so I do stuff like that. I design books. I design the interiors, the covers. I design corporate identity, logos, identity pieces, brochures, websites. All of that kind of stuff is what I do. And so if you're looking for anything like that, come on over and see me. And I'll give you a good price. And say you listen to this show, and I'll probably give you the same price. Because my prices are already good. And they're good across the board. So come on over, check me out, ScottAlanRoberts.com, and avail yourself of some great design work, great advertising, marketing, style, design, and illustration. Boom, that's all I got to say about that. Let's move into today's show. Now, again, I just want to get us up on some current events. And, there was something I heard, and I put this up on my Facebook page. Let me go over there and look at this for a second because I want you to hear this. This morning I put this up, and if you are on my Facebook page as a friend, you may have seen this already, but I think it might be worth looking at or just taking mention of. I was listening to, I don't know if it was Steven Crowder who was doing this. He used to do his go to the college campus and have the sign, thus and thus and thus, prove me wrong. And giving people an opportunity to have open debate with him. And he would record those, and I think this was him doing this in a more or less kind of a Zoom setting, or it was somebody else, because it wasn't his voice asking the question. But the question was being asked, and it was of several African-American people that were on this Zoom. How would you define what is a... do you think whites are... It was a question like that. Do you think white people have privilege? I don't know if it had the word privilege. Are more superior. Do you think whites are more superior? Or can you answer that charge that white people think they're more superior? It was a question like that. And one of these guys came on. He was African American. He was obviously a BLM supporter. He did not seem radical to me, like he didn't look radical. He wasn't weird. He wasn't acting weird. He wasn't being preachy. Seemed like an awfully nice person just listening to the way he talked. But he said this very sincerely. He said, white people are more superior because they have more fun in life than black people. And the questioner said, what do you mean by that? And he went on to explain that whites are having more fun in life they're having more fun in life is a direct result of their white privilege, which allows them to not feel so oppressed. So what he was getting at was, I, as a black person, can't have the kind of fun a white person has because I'm constantly looking over my shoulder for oppression, that kind of thing. And there you have it. That's the way some people view white people enjoying life or having fun. And I don't know how he defined having fun in life. Now, my wife and I, my kids and I, my friends and I, we all have fun in life. And we make fun wherever we can. I have gotten to the point where I say in life to anybody, if I'm ending a business conversation with a client, I'll say, all right, great talking to you. Have a fun day. Or have a fun afternoon. Have a fun morning. Have a fun weekend. I say to all my friends when I tell, hey, have a fun weekend, dude. And, hey, have a fun time. I say to Rainey when she goes off to work, I say, hey, I love you. Be safe. Have a fun day. And she's like, yeah, right. And, because I believe that life is meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to have fun. Yes, we have obligations. We have responsibilities. We have things that we have to do in order. We have to work to maintain. I had some lunch earlier, and remember, I work at home. I had lunch earlier, and I watched, for lunch, I heated up some tater tot hot dish from last night. And I heated up a bowl of that, and I sat down and I watched the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery, which, by the way, now that I've rabbit trailed and rabbit trailing again, ends up being a pretty well done Star Trek series. I think you'd really enjoy that if you haven't seen it. They're in their third season now, and I watched episode 6 this afternoon when I had lunch. And yet I could have sat there and watched some other stuff. I could have taken a nap. It'd be nice sometimes, just in the middle of the day, to take a nap. And I sat there as the episode ended, and I said, nope, I got to get up. I got to get stuff done. I got work to do. I got obligations. I got responsibilities. And I had to come back in here and do some client work. And all of that stuff that is the stuff of life, I still believe that life is about having fun. You've heard me say it a million times, my mantra from that Mark Twain quote. 20 years from now, you will regret more the things you didn't do than the things you did do. So cast off from the safe harbor. Set your sails to the trade winds. Explore, dream, discover. That is what I've taken on as my life's mantra. Now, am I able to always cast off from the safe harbor and set my sails to the trade winds? Not always. I've got a family. I've got obligations. I've got things I did that, in a positive way, tie me down to something. I'm here. I'm tethered to my life, and that has become my responsibility and my obligation. Therefore, I can't just go and fuck off. Sorry, I use that word sometimes. I sometimes just go off and I do my own thing. I have fun in life, and I want to bring my wife along, and I want to bring my kids along, and I want to bring my friends along, because life is meant to be lived. It's meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to be, even when you have obligation and responsibility, it's meant to be enjoyed, and you find the fun in it. You know, when I was in business, working for another company, and I've mentioned this before, we had the fish philosophy, which came into play. We had a company come in because we thought we had some toxic junk going on in our company, and the fish philosophy was something that we taught. And it started in the Pike Place market. If you ever buy like Starbucks coffee or something like that, there is a where did I lose my train of thought? If you've ever bought their coffee, it's like Pike Place, the Pike Place coffee, their blend. That's from the Pike Place Coffee Market in Seattle. And there is a 5-point, or I think it's a 4-point. Let Let me see. I'm looking it up as I'm talking here. I could probably give them to you, but it's called the fish philosophy because it started in the fish market. It's how they motivated their employees to enjoy being at work and to enjoy life. Let's see. I'm going to try to see if I can find this. The four points of this philosophy. Let's find it here. And this is something, and by the way, I'm going to relate this all right back to what I was talking about, what I heard that this fellow say this morning. Now, white people have more fun. It's all about positive energy. It's about energizing yourself, energizing your people. And I'm looking for the fish philosophy at work. Here they are. There's 5 things. 5 things. And I've mentioned these before. This is how I view work. This is how I view life. Now, it's not always. If Rainey were sitting here, she'd go, bullshit. Because there are days I'm like, I'm not doing this. And there are days I am not very happy about certain things. But the 5 points of this, there are 4 ways to apply mindfulness and enjoy your day, no matter what you're doing. It's 1, mindfulness for work. Mindfulness. Have that at the front of your mind. I have to be aware. I have to be here. Number 2, segues right out of that, being there. You find opportunities. You know, it's being present. It's being in the moment. When I talked about a spiritual philosophy of being awake and realizing you're awake, being there, living in the moment, that's what this is about. Be there. You might hate your job. You might hate having to get up and pull your ass to work. But when you have to do it, go there and bring with you the attitude of mindfulness and the attitude of being there. I'm here. I'm here. You know? Number 3 is choose your attitude. Be aware when it counts. So choose your attitude. Mindfulness, being there, choosing your attitude. You can choose to hate your job and hate everybody else around you and make your work life drudgery, and you become the clock watcher. How many more minutes until my 8-hour shift is done? Or you can choose your attitude. Number 4 is be open to the possibilities by play. Play at work. One thing they showed at the Pike Place Fish Market where this was all developed was the guys playing with their customers, with the fish, throwing the fish around and doing stuff and making people happy, which segues into the 5th thing, make somebody's day. Make somebody's day. Engage without attacking anybody. And so this fish philosophy is something that works. I don't always adhere to it strictly, but it's something that I look at and it's something that I do. And so getting all the way back to this guy, white people have more fun because black people always need to look back to see how oppressed they are. Now remember, I have said offense is something that you choose. I am offended by you because I choose to let your words offend me or your deeds offend me. Or you can be somebody who says, I understand that offense is something that I choose, and therefore I choose to not be offended. So it doesn't matter what you say. You can call me a Nazi. It doesn't offend me. I'm not a Nazi, and I'm not a white supremacist or any of those things. Just for the record. And I've been called everything in the book, and I have people that mistreat me because of my certain beliefs on things. But you know what? I can choose my attitude. I can choose my reaction to that. And I say offense is something I choose to allow offend me. If I choose to not let it offend me, water off a duck's back, we used to say, you're not going to offend me. So all those people who are offended about everything in the book, grow up and learn that you don't have to choose to be offended. And so I got to tell you, white people need to be demonstrably more unhappy, according to this man. Because when they show their happiness, they show that they have superiority over blacks who are constantly in fear of the oppression or living with their past oppressions or whatever it might be. And I say, you know what? Everybody's got equal opportunity here. You move on from it. You choose to not let it offend you. You choose to not live as somebody who is being oppressed, and you choose to be the person who is creating your attitude. You are being there in your time and in your day. The Bible said something like, make use of your time because the days are evil. So make good use of who you are. And I think that's what we need to engage in. And be engaged in making somebody else's day. You know how that makes you feel when you make somebody else's day? That's amazing stuff. So, when I hear, I'm not citing this guy to make it an issue of race, of white versus black or anything like that. That was his point. I'm not offended by that. You know why? I don't choose to be offended by that. But what I find is that he has locked himself up, and he, in essence, oppresses himself by making that be the attitude he chooses. So let's brush all of that aside, and let me make that point one more time. Be there. Make somebody's day. Choose your attitude. All of these things are things that will make you a happy person. You know what? I think people are very surprised, all my liberal friends. I get mockery from some of them, but about the elections, because they knew I voted for Trump. And I think they all knew that I supported Trump, but I had a lot of people, I think that I've gone off the deep end because of the election. And you know what? I just say, you know what? This is what happened. I choose my attitude. I choose where I'm going to be. I still want to make your day. I have people who vehemently come out against me, and I try to make their day. I try to be happy with them. There are some people I tell them, hey, shut up. Don't need your bullshit. You've just hit my fuck off button, and I've just pushed it now for you because you're pushing to attempt to drag me into your oppressive feelings that you want to put on me. Don't accept it. You know why? Choose my attitude. And so all of that to say, I just wanted to introduce with that because I thought that was a very interesting thing that I saw happening out there, and that's an attitude I think that exists out there. Don't let anybody take race out of the equation. Don't let anybody tell you that what you are doing is wrong, unless you're really doing something wrong. If you strive to be a good person, you choose your attitude, you choose to be the kind of person you need to be, and you want to have fun in life, more power to you. As long as you're not shirking your responsibilities or letting go your obligations, things like that, sticking to your commitments, you make sure that your happiness comes by the things that you create. We all create our worlds, and that's the way you can create yours. No matter what's going on politically, no matter what's going on in current events, no matter who tells you to wear a mask or doesn't, you know what? You make your own life and you make your day. There you go. That's all I got to say. I'm getting too preachy. I'm going to move on. I want to move on into what we were talking about yesterday and where we left off. We were talking about this whole Q thing, this Q source thing. And when it comes to Jesus and the historical Jesus, what do you do with Jesus? Where are you with Jesus? I know I had a lot of places where I let my faith go. I moved away from it because I had problems with it. And many of you have seen in this show is actually a chronicle of my thinking through a lot of issues that are out there, spiritually, religiously, so on, historically. And you've seen where I've come from and what my struggles have been with this. And I once had a man who was a Byzantine priest who knew I was in the midst of all that, and he says, hey, I want you to write a book about the life of Jesus, a book about Jesus with me. And I said, I don't think I can do that right now. And he said, why? What do you believe about Jesus? I said, it's not that I disbelieve anything. It's that I don't know what to believe. And I said, I can't. He wanted to do a kind of a counterpoint type of thing. And I said, I don't deny things about Jesus. I said, but I can tell you what. I said, I don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, even though I have walked away from my faith issues. And I thought Jesus was a thing that I couldn't touch. It seemed to me to be that part of my faith that had an element in it that said, I cannot deny this. I don't want to have anything to do with the religion, but I cannot deny this. And yet I still looked into a lot of different things about the historical Jesus, if he would have existed. And I've come out very strong saying there are all these points against there being an historical Jesus. And then I come back with later and say, I've read this, and this counters everything I just presented. And so I go into presenting that material. It's because I'm still in flux about it. I don't have Jesus doesn't talk to me, I don't have that going on. So I've got to figure these things out like all of us. And as you read through this Q material, you find that the Q source material is what many scholars have thought since the mid-19th century is the stuff that many of at least two of the major gospel writers based their work on. Well, Mark based his work on, and other two, Matthew and Luke, based their work off of Mark and probably the Q source material. The Q source material was something that was once titled the Sayings of Jesus. And it's basically, that's what it is all the way through, and that's what we found yesterday as we started talking about this. But at the same time, we see that it was probably something that was more community-driven and written. Those who claim to have found the real Jesus in Q believe that they have this important edge on their 19th century counterparts. And having carefully broken down all the hypothetical Q text, that is, again, the parallel passages in Matthew and Luke, into all these layers that reflect the stages of its writing and the rewriting in several decades during the first century AD. And some scholars think that they can reconstruct not only this document, this Q document, this source document, in its earliest form, but also the community that produced it. I think we know why this was written and to whom it was written. Remember, I've said when you look at old scripture, you look at old archaeological text, you have to look at a few different things. You have to look at, one, what was the context in which it was written? Two, who was the audience to whom it was being written? Three, what would that audience's reaction have been to what in context they were reading in their day? And so you have to look at this and say, what were they reading and who was reading it? Why? And they pretty much centered on Galilee and the cities in Galilee and where Jesus was. But the Q source never goes into the Passion Week, the crucifixion of Jesus. That was down in Jerusalem. That was way south. And so this was all kept up in the Galilee region. And so you don't find, there's this lack of the crucifixion and passion and resurrection narrative in the Q text. And that's kind of where we left off last night. And that's where we have to leave off at the beginning of the show, at the end of the first segment. So you guys sit tight. We're going to get into this a little more heavy when we come back.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com to come over and see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. And you can also be watching this show right now in its video simulcast. Today, we don't have a lot of pretty pictures to throw up and cool extra things to show you. But today you get to just watch my mug looking into the camera, talking to you, and you can join the live chat room going on right now over right on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Join the live chat room discussion. You don't have to discuss anything. You can just sit and watch it if you want, and watch the video simulcast of this episode. Now, we left off in the first segment talking about why the Q community was deemed in the 19th century, and through years and years and decades of study ever since, why it was deemed to have been Galilean in its content. Why is the Q community deemed to have been Galilean? Because Jesus did most of his preaching in Galilee. And Q mentions all the towns he visited, and it doesn't at all get into his going to Jerusalem. And so we see the sayings of Jesus coming out in Q. And the collection of sayings of Jesus would precede accounts of his passion in terms of the age of the writings. And this is John S. Gerson. He is the Associate Director of the Institute for Antiquity and Christianity, a Claremont graduate, a school-affiliated research center, headed by Robinson, we talked about yesterday, that is the headquarters for the International Q Project. Whew, that's a title. Now, Gerson and other scholars involved in the project surmise that Jesus' followers started collecting up his sayings even before he died, giving them an authenticity and immediately that the Gospel's passion stories lack. And you know, it's kind of like me quoting Mark Twain. You can pick up books of Mark Twain's quotes and read through, and it's pretty cool. I got this book here in front of me. It's laying open because they're looking at it, but it sits on my shelf. It's called Flash Wisdom, and it's a curated collection of mind-blowing, perspective-changing quotes. And I actually saw this one. This is purely coincidental, and I don't believe in coincidence, but in talking in the first part of the show today, I was talking about this guy that said happiness and what makes happiness, all of that. I was looking through this and I found this quote right here. It's on page 85 of this Flash Wisdom. And it says, "I cannot believe the purpose of life is to be happy. I think the purpose of life is to be useful, to be responsible, to be compassionate. It is, above all, to matter, to count, to stand for something, to have made some difference that you lived at all." That was a quote by Leo Roston. And I happened upon that, but did I really happen upon it? Is there something that aligns all this stuff out there? We have to ask ourselves that. But, so, all these guys, Gerson and the scholars involved in the project, surmised that Jesus' followers started collecting all his sayings, all his quotes, his wisdom, his flash wisdom, if you will. Oh, I remember what Jesus, Yeshua Bar Yosef, the son of Joseph, I remember what he said that one day. He said, bring all the little children to me. And blah, blah, blah. And so they started collecting these things, writing them down. And they started collecting his sayings even before he died, giving them an authenticity and an immediacy that the gospel passion stories lacked. And so this is what you have when you start looking at Q source. And Maya, I got to say that to you because you're the one who actually prompted me to look into doing something on the Q source material by something you said in the chat room the other night. And this is something I think that you can kind of bank on with the Q source material, is that this is all the sayings of Jesus collected that gave them an authenticity, and they gave them an immediacy that the gospel passion stories lack when you go into those in the gospels. And also the apparently primitive state of the Q text, mostly sayings of Jesus without heavy emphasis on narrative. There's no paragraphs describing what he's talking about. It just gives his quotes. It means that its composition in all likelihood preceded that of the 4 canonical Gospels. It's not written in a narrative format that you're supposed to pick up and read about the life of Jesus, the Savior, the Son of God, and all of these things. Nah, it's just a collection of his sayings, for the most part. And all of which take the form of this quasi-biographical narratives. That's what the 4 Gospels do, the canonized Gospels. The same with most of the 66 other Gospels that are out there, and which scholars believe were written between 65 and 100 A.D. That's the Gospels. They think most of the Gospels were written by guys who followed Jesus in the 30s A.D., and they wrote their stuff down into book forms when they were a little older. Some scholars believe that the oldest parts of Q may date from as early as the year 50, 20 years after Jesus' death, putting them alongside the earliest Christian or Jesus movement writings in existence. And so by assigning an early composition date to Q, placing the Q community in Galilee, and imputing to its members some first-hand knowledge of what Jesus said, scholars have built their reconstructed text into an apparent window of authenticity that permits a glimpse of who, in their view, the real Jesus was. What if you could take a historical character, and we don't know much about their lives, their personal lives. We know their histories. We know what other people have said about them. Imagine if you could have a book of their quotes from while they lived. It constructs a picture of who that person is. It's like with Abraham Lincoln. We have a lot that we can go to on his quotes, his personal things he said to people. But he was only about 160 years ago. Imagine going back 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and trying to figure out what somebody was really like in their authentic life. And the scholars believe that this is what the Q source text records. It's a sustained, living voice of somebody who was there. So in a sense, it really authenticates that there was a living Jesus who lived and breathed and preached and taught and interacted with people in the Galilee region in Israel. If one accepts this logic and follows it through, one's forced to conclude that this non-Christian Jesus, the Galilee-based wise man who displayed no interest in the end of the world, he talked in none of these things. Did he talk about resurrection or redemption? Is about as historical a Jesus as modern scholars are likely to receive. And it's no wonder that Mac, the guy we started talking about yesterday, believed that the publication of the reconstructed Q text could undermine Christianity as strictly defined. That was his thought. Now, when you think about it, remember when we talked about early Christianity, we found that the stuff about turning Jesus into a divine Son of God, the actual Son of God, that these fit all the molds of the previous messiahs who had come along before him. They were all pictures of these God-men in Gnostic mysticism or in the mystery religions. And so what this Q text seems to still be called is a hypothesis. A bearded, muscular, 65-year-old whose flamboyance and occasional ferocity have helped to bring his views to attention, Mac himself is famous as an advocate of the theory that Jesus was a roving, cynic-like sage, more of a secular philosopher than a religious figure. And the cynics were adherents of an authority-questioning philosophical movement that began in Athens nearly 4 centuries before Jesus. So Mac gained this particular notice at an academic conference one year by propounding humorously that, of what he says, what came to be known as the car accident explanation for Jesus' death. He suggested that crucifixion might have been sheer happenstance. Indeed, not a few of the eyebrow-raising ideas about Jesus that appear in the press are likely to have some association with Mac. And in 1988, Mac argued that the Gospel of Mark was responsible for contributing to the American mindset that led to the Vietnam War and to Ronald Reagan's defense policy. The Lost Gospel, his book, which has sold tens of thousands of copies, repeated that theme. Mac's book in 1995 blamed the Bible for providing justifications for Waco-style apocalyptic violence and the selfish exploitation of natural resources. This is the way Mac started going with his thinking. In Waco, you remember what happened in Waco, the David Koresh and all of that compound, and who was she? Who was our secretary? Was she Secretary of State? The woman who put down the orders to take down Koresh and his compound. So during something that Mac once said, he joked about the reconstructed Q document. He said, "This is going to complicate things for people. There will be a text. It's going to have a Library of Congress number." So them, as he's talking about, refers to non-believers in Q. So fundamentalist Christians. Mac was in essence saying the fundamentalists aren't going to believe this. They're not going to give any credence to it. And Maya, when you're in Bible school, I don't know what kind of Bible school you're in. I'm talking to someone specifically who's out there as a listener and is in our chat room. I don't know what style you go by. When I went to seminary and Bible school, I was in a conservative fundamentalist Baptist setting. And so we would have rejected this offhand. So the non-believers are really the fundamentalist Christians. They're biblical scholars whose theories of gospel composition don't include the Q source. They write it off as something that probably doesn't exist because there is no real hard copy of it anywhere. And scholars who are Q neutral, who believe that Q makes sense as a possible explanation for similarities of wording and subject matter in Matthew and Luke, but are unwilling to venture a guess as to what Q's text or texts originally looked like, let alone try to reconstruct it and construct it, the battle's over. Q is particularly intense because, of course, it's not merely scholarly, but also theological and political. There are all these elements that come to play when you have to look at this text. This reconstructed text based on Mark was probably the source for Matthew and Luke, and they had all these similarities as we talked about yesterday. So in some respects, the International Q Project, which operates under the auspices of the highly regarded Society of Biblical Literature, resembles the flashy Jesus Seminar. You remember that stuff? Are any of you familiar with that? The Jesus Seminar people that were out there? This was big when I was in my early seminary and ministry days. The Jesus Seminar, whose headquarters are also in California, and whose member scholars assemble and they vote, usually in the negative, on whether Jesus said or did specific things ascribed to him in the canonical Gospels. So Mack and James Robinson were both early members of the Jesus Seminar and are friends of its founder, Robert Funk. So I always called the Jesus Seminar, it's the Jesus Funk Project. But anyway, both groups poll their members to determine whether material is authentic in the biblical texts. However, unlike the Jesus Seminar, whose ever-changing roster of participants, Mack has dropped out, Robinson rarely attended, they vote as if they were at a town meeting. The 35-member Q Project has put in 15 years of painstaking work, assembling the requisite passages from Matthew and Luke, breaking them down into variation units, and in order to assess the tiniest differences of wording and order, and amassing an enormous computer database of 150 years' worth of scholarly opinion as to whether the particular variations represent genuine Q material or creative rewriting by either or both evangelists. And what pops into my mind as I talk about that is that verse where it's God speaking. He says, "Not one jot or one tittle of God's word will pass away." It's talking about the veracity of Scripture. A jot and a tittle, these were things in Hebrew where you saw the little accent marks, the jot and the tittle. And not one of those things will pass away, says God. And then they spend all this time researching every jot and tittle of, and by the way, the New Testament, the sayings of Jesus weren't written in Hebrew. This was all written in Greek, Koine Greek, Aramaic. And so the project, in fact, it's an international project. It's at least half of its members are affiliated with universities on this continent in the United States. And many of them were students of Robinson's at one time or another. And only 3 years ago did Robinson and his project co-editor John Kloppenberg, an associate professor at St. Michael's College in Toronto, bring in Paul Hoffman of the University of Bamberg in Germany as a third editor for Documenta Q, lending the leadership of the Reconstruction Project this European representation. So Mack, who was long heavily involved in Q research, but not a member of the official Q Project, is a truculent and colorful Robinson, 72, is a formal, mildly rumpled scholar of the old school who specializes in large-scale text assembly projects. And his previous venture, his great achievement, in fact, was a triumph of both scholarship and diplomacy. Under the auspices of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, he persuaded the Egyptian government during the 1970s to break a monopoly held by French and German scholars and permit the facsimile publication of a trove of 4th century Coptic language manuscripts discovered at Nag Hammadi, near the Nile River in 1945. And the eventual result was an English translation of the Nag Hammadi texts, overseen by Robinson, which to this day remains the only complete translation of those ancient religious manuscripts. And so at the Institute for Antiquity and Christianity, located in a handsome whitewashed brick building at the Claremont campus in California, John Agerson shows off printouts from the Q's project's vast database, including a breakdown of the opening verse of the Lord's Prayer into 6 heavily annotated variation units, and a 91-page single-spaced analysis of a verse from Matthew that the team ultimately decided was not Q in source. Can you imagine that? One verse in the Bible in a 91-page document where they've torn the whole thing apart linguistically to talk about why that couldn't be part of the Q source. And so the reconstructed text as a whole follows this sequential order in which Q material, now this will get a little bogged down a bit here, but hear this out. It follows the sequential order in which Q material appears in Luke, who's thought to have tampered less with Q's structure, although the wording of the reconstructed passages is derived about 50% from Luke and 50% from Matthew. So both evangelists read like stripped-down versions of themselves in the Q reconstruction, with most Christian underlay deleted. And so the Peter's publication of those thousands of pages of material began with the Lord's Prayer reconstruction. And it was a volume on a temptation of Jesus was scheduled, and further volumes appear at the rate of 4 a year for the next 15 years or so, and with each roughly 300-page volume taking up perhaps 100 words of Q. And in addition, the project expects to issue, and did issue, by the way, a 1-volume translation of the reconstructed Q, designed for the public. That was about 20 years ago. And 1-volume critical edition of the Greek text for scholars. So the detailed reconstruction work is impressive. But nagging questions remain for any observer. This is so overladen and overburdened with scholarship that rips apart every word, reparses every phrase for hundreds and thousands of page material on just 100 words. And it goes on with everything else in what they think is the Q source text. And so it's truly possible to turn a hypothetical document into a real document? Is that? The Q source is hypothetical. But they think they've reconstructed it by looking at all these comparative things and saying there must have been a source for this. And that's where they've reconstructed the Q text. And so is it truly possible to turn a hypothetical text into a real-life document that has veracity and weight? Q partisans have taken a working hypothesis and given it a life and a shape of its own. They're going so far as to speculate about the original manuscript, what it looked like, even though other scholars believe the Q may have consisted solely of oral tradition. It might not even have ever originally been written down. The Q Project has assumed that an actual first-century papyrus scroll existed. And that provenance firmly in place, the Q manuscript, quote-unquote, has such a palpable reality in the minds of its proponents that Mack, in his book The Lost Gospel, refers to it matter-of-factly as a document, the Q document. Now, Q has grown over time from 200 or so parallel passages in Matthew and Luke to about 235 passages, as scholars have assigned ever more material to it. And Robinson, Mack, and others decided to call the enhanced Q a full-fledged gospel. They've come right out and said the Q gospel. And gospels are, among other things, vehicles for their authors' theology. So the next step has been to work out the theology the Q embodies. That's the natural progression. Now they've created an actual document that doesn't exist. They've created it, they've constructed it out of meticulous scholarship, by the way. It wasn't sloppy scholarship, meticulous. American and European joint scholarship efforts. But now there is this effort that was stepped into to figure out what was the theology of the people who put this text together. What does the Q theology embody? It's a theology distinct in the view of Q scholars from either Matthew's or Luke's. It wasn't even the same theological basis for what Q was saying. And so, by discerning layers of textual composition in Q, again, just as if it were an actual document rewritten over time, advocates have worked out the stages in which that theology developed. And finally, they've come to this reconstruction of the community that subscribed to the Q theology and wrote and read the Q gospel, those shadowy Galileans, the unrecorded elsewhere in ancient texts, who wandered from town to town, carrying no food, no money. And as can be seen, this entire edifice is building from hypothesis to document to gospel to theology to community, is either a marvel of perspective scholarship or it's a shadowy sandcastle. So, to understand how this edifice came to exist entails an understanding of the puzzles behind the similarities in Matthew and Luke. Puzzles that have perplexed scholars and theologians since ancient times, and also an understanding of the recent history of biblical scholarship itself. This is where biblical archaeology comes into this. We talk about biblical archaeology all the time. The Q hypothesis arose from an attempt to solve what biblical scholars call the synoptic problem. Anyone who's ever studied the four canonical Gospels is aware that three of them, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, have a good deal of substantive material and even exact wording in common. In the fourth Gospel, John, although it contains a few parallels with the other three, is largely idiosyncratic in its subject matter and its presentation of Jesus. And for that reason, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels, because they all kind of line up with each other. Synoptic derives from a Greek verb meaning to see together. And about 90% of Mark's subject matter is also in Matthew. And more than 50% of Mark's subject matter is in Luke. So Matthew and Luke are both a good deal longer than Mark. However, they each contain around 1,100 verses, whereas Mark contains about 661 verses. You've got about roughly 55% in size. Furthermore, both Matthew and Luke frequently follow Mark's order when presenting Mark's material, though they seldom put the other material they have in common into the same place in Mark's framework. And that material appears in scattered chunks all throughout Luke, whereas Matthew is organized rhetorically around a theme, and such as the Sermon on the Mount. So, finally, studying the Greek texts of the three synoptics side by side suggests that the relationship among them may be literary, a matter of their authors having read one another's work, rather than having drawn on the same eyewitness accounts as a source or a common oral tradition about Jesus. And in many cases, the three evangelists use the exact same Greek word, right down to the verb form. And in a narrative of the same event, you see striking similarities, almost identicalities, if I can use that as a word. And in a few cases, entire sentences are almost identical among the three Gospels. And so the matter shared by all three synoptics is known in New Testament circles as the triple tradition. The matter shared by only Matthew and Luke, amounting to about 1/5 of the verses in each evangelist's gospel, is known as the double tradition. And how to explain those traditions? In a treatise written around 400 AD, the church father Augustine seems to have concluded that Matthew wrote his gospel first. Matthew was the favorite evangelist of the early Christians, followed by Mark, who wrote a condensation of Matthew, and then Luke, who used both Matthew and Mark. An 18th century scholar, Johann J. Griesbach, taking issue with Augustine, thought that Luke came second, and then Mark, who sometimes thought that apostate, he believes the wrong guy wrote first. You can just hear him now. He thought that Luke came second, and then Mark, who sometimes followed Matthew's text, sometimes Luke's. Matthew often disagrees with Mark on triple tradition details where Luke agrees with him, and vice versa. So the Griesbach hypothesis continues to have adherents to this day, and including William Farmer, an emeritus New Testament professor at Southern Methodist University. Blah, blah, blah. We got to end there for tonight. There's more to this. I keep trying to cram more in, and we don't have enough time. So we're going to come, and maybe tomorrow we'll conclude this Q source material. Maybe we won't. So guys, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Some of this is technical junk, but it's all very cool when you think about it, if you're interested at all in Christian Judaic faith. Well, Christian more because it's New Testament. That's all we got. We got to go. Sit tight. Take a 23-hour break, and we'll see you then.